Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Waste World podcast. My name is Gage Edwards, back with you again. I know we were off last week. I've been traveling. I've been out of my house for the last 3 weeks at different conferences, including the World of Concrete, the TICE show, both out in Las Vegas, back-to-back for those, and Compost 2026, which I will be talking about today. And if you haven't noticed, I am horribly sick, which is part of the reason why we didn't have a podcast last week, because I was balancing being horribly sick and at Compost 2026, and I just could not find the strength to get a podcast on the books. So a week off for recovery, and wouldn't you know it, still recovering. But couldn't go 2 weeks. Have to get this one in. I'm sorry if I'm choking up during this thing. I'm trying to cut out coughs and sneezes and things, so you are not being slapped in the ears by whatever is trying to leave my body. So that's that. That's the update from me. Hope you had a good week. Hope you've been doing well. I'll give you a quick pause for you to answer that. Have you been doing well? That's good. That's good to hear. Nice. Okay. Today's episode, we are going to be talking about 2026 Compost 2026, the events out in Sacramento, California, which I just attended. A fun show, always a highly energetic, highly informative show. One of the more informatives that I go to, I feel like, that really puts a strong focus on the educational program and showing off like, hey, stuff is progressing. Yeah. Which, you know, it was nice also to be out in Sacramento where it was 65 degrees all week and not at home where it has been 18 or less. 18 or less degrees. 10 inches of snow. What a nightmare. But thank God I got out of the house. Or at least I missed most of that tundra that flowed through being at 3 different conferences. So I left all that home, and I like to thank Sacramento for taking care of me with some nice weather. Also nice food. That was my first time out in Sacramento. Did a pretty good job feeding me. So good on you, Sacramento. Good on you. Okay, Compost 2026. This year's conference really reinforced something we've been tracking at waste360.com. That is composting and organics diversion, no longer on the side, our side conversations in solid waste. You know, they are both front and center in climate strategy, landfill operations, agricultural resilience, and the conference really reinforced that. While I was out, I put together 2 articles from the show that focused on California's evolving policy landscape, specifically talking about SB 279 and how it builds on SB 1383, you know, which we've heard plenty about. SB 279 needs a little bit more of that limelight. So we have an article about that, which I'll also be going over a little bit of that here today. The other article talked about the national research that this one doctor did, showing how aggressive organics diversion could slash landfill methane emissions across the U.S. So we'll dive into a little of that as well. Those together, those sessions painted what I would say a clear picture of where the industry is heading and where pressure points still are within composting and diversion of organics from our landfills. So let's talk about it. So Compost 2026, you know, we're in the room. Operators, policymakers, researchers, innovators, trying to solve the same puzzle. How do we scale organics recycling fast enough to meet climate goals without breaking local systems in the process, right? We don't want to overwhelm anybody. So for me, the biggest value at the show continues to be the educational sessions, kind of like I mentioned. That's kind of where we really find the honest look at like what's working, what's stalled, and what people are wrestling with on the ground. The research, you know, it's always the devil's in the details, right? So when you get up there and you're watching these PowerPoints, you're like, oh, okay, I can see it. This is measurable. There it is. And it's always so nice when people in the audience have a lot of questions to kind of follow up and kind of keep all of us honest on the work that we're doing. So contamination and permitting markets for finished compost, all of it comes together. One of the most, I mentioned this, the more insightful sessions that I saw was led by John Haywood, executive director of the People, Food, and Land Foundation. Now, John was focusing in on California's SB 279 policy. Like I mentioned, complementing the state's flagship diversion law, SB 1383, which we have talked at length about. So, in his presentation, Haywood made it clear that SB 279 isn't meant to replace SB 1383. It's designed to work alongside it, which is the name of the game here. SB 1383, of course, what drives diversion? It's requiring jurisdictions to keep food scraps and yard waste out of landfills and turn them into compost. We all know that. Haywood explained the rapid push exposed some real pressure points in California's system, asking for 70% of diversion rate right at the gates. One of the week-long jokes I kept hearing from the show is SB 1383 requires that much diversion, but the state's really hitting much lower than that with somebody, I won't say who, I'm not going to call anybody out, but the conversations kind of went this way. It's maybe 20% diversion in the state for this. Not really hitting that 70% yet. So it's a work in progress. Local governments, they're dealing with aggressive compliance timelines, difficulty citing new facilities and limited nearby processing capacity. So when PFL, like I said, PFL, People, Food, and Land Foundation, reviewed statewide data, they uncovered that what Haywood called a homeless biomass issue. Large volumes of manure and woody material that simply don't have enough local outlets today. So we're not even just talking about the food waste that we all know and love. Though the wood waste, manure waste. There's extra organics here that aren't being accounted for because it can't. Local outlets overwhelmed. What SB 29 or 279 does, which was passed unanimously through California legislature last year, is meant to unlock capacity quickly through what Haywood described as a place-based approach. So that bill, 279, expands permit exclusions for low-risk composting operations, doubles allowable volumes under some exclusions from 100 to 200 cubic yards, and boosts them to as much as 500 cubic yards for public agencies. That also gives operators new flexibility to handle woody biomass generated from orchard removals, storm cleanup, forest management, you name it. Allowing composting closer to where that material is produced and letting facilities blend in off-site feedstocks like manure while staying under permit excluded pathways. So, putting it all together now. Before this, restrictions kept agricultural composting streams largely confined within single operations, which made it hard for to manage wood-heavy surges at scale. SB 279 aims to remove those barriers while still preserving the only role fully permitted of centralized facilities. What struck me was how clearly Haywood framed the policy balance. Now again, SB 1383 drives diversion and demand. SB 279 expands supply and processing options. Together, as Haywood argued, they're meant to grow compost markets steadily, placing material where it delivers the biggest agronomic and climate benefits instead of flooding regions with oversupply and destabilizing prices. That theme, the scaling thoughtfully instead of chaotically, came up again across the conference. There's so much waste in the world. there's just so much. So when we need to scale up, typically we have to scale up quickly, and sometimes it isn't that way. So let's move on to another session we covered, another article available on waste360.com. We're talking about modeling methane and its nationwide impact based on what's happening in California. So that first policy conversation sets the stage perfectly for another standout session that I attended.
This one was hosted by Dr. Brendan Harrison, who I alluded to earlier, of Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. I watched Dexter's Lab as a kid, okay? Harrison asked a big picture question. What if the rest of the country adopted diversion levels similar to California's? So using SB 1383's 75% diversion requirements as a benchmark, Brendan and his team modeled emissions from more than 1,100 active landfills across the contiguous U.S. And in those results, big things. So that scenario, organic waste diversion could avoid up to 29 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalents every year. That includes roughly 1.4 million metric tons of methane. Cutting out the coughs, Harrison said that would equal to about 40% reduction in total landfill methane emissions nationwide. Wild. So, food waste, doing most of the heavy lifting in these reductions, reinforces just how powerful keeping organics out of landfills can be from a climate perspective, regardless of whether material goes to composting or anaerobic digestion. Regionally, if we look at Texas, Florida, and California, those states showed the largest mitigation potential. California actually ranked third because many of its landfills already capture methane, while we saw a higher share in Texas and Florida who still operate without gas collection systems. Harrison also tackled one of the industry's most persistent questions. What happens to all the compost? So, him and his team modeled distribution nationwide and found that even at I'm so sorry. Cutting out more coughs. Even at aggressive diversion rates, most compost could be applied locally to cropland and rangeland at reasonable hauling distances, particularly in the Southwest where rangelands become essential outlets. So, in other words, markets exist. The tougher challenges are infrastructure, contamination, permitting, and participation. So, all important. A heavy theme of this podcast has always been it takes all of us. And there is no sign of that slowing down. It takes all of us every time. Compost 2026 felt like a checkpoint moment in the industry. As one of the more major events that I try to attend, conversations weren't about whether composting matters. It's about execution. And how do we build facilities faster without losing community trust? How do we clean up feedstocks? How do we make markets for compost more reliable? How do landfill methane reduction strategies align with diversion programs? And how do state policies like SB 1383 and SB 279 actually work together in the real world? So, sessions, the show floor, the conversations, there is growing recognition that municipal organics alone won't close national nutrient loops. Biosolids, manure, agricultural residues are going to have to play a role too, especially if soil health and fertilizer displacement become bigger policy drivers. So if we look ahead, if we look off into the future, California remains a testing ground everyone is watching. All eyes on California. SB 1383 continues to drive diversion, even as jurisdictions work through contamination, enforcement, and full facility shortages. SB 279, now aimed at loosening some of those bottlenecks by enabling faster, more localized composting options and keeping woody biomass out of burn piles and disposal sites. Research like Harrison's is strengthening the climate case for investing in all of it. If Compost 2026 showed me and us anything, it's that the next phase of growth in organics recycling is going to be less about passing new mandates and more about making complex systems actually work at scale. So that is my wrap up for Compost 2026. I hope you enjoyed that. Sorry for the shorter episode. Sorry for missing a week last week. Forgive me, I was sick and on the road. And you don't want to have to deal with my road equipment. It's good. It's not as good as this equipment at home. And when I'm in that hotel room chowing down some Shake Shack, You don't want to hear me smacking my way through that episode. So here I am. If you enjoyed what I went over here today, like I said, those 2 articles are on waste360.com right now. You can find those there. We're going to keep track of composting, organics diversion, and landfill methane reduction as they continue to evolve across California, across the country. You'll get all that news at waste360.com. There are other podcasts coming up. We just recorded a great one. We have another great one coming up this week. I am about to go back on the road. I will be at the Wastewater Show, WET, out in Indianapolis. And then I'm going out to the Global Waste Management Symposium in Palm Springs. So keep an eye on waste360.com for more coverage on both of those shows if you're interested in wastewater or management of waste and landfills, methane. Of course, as always, make sure you like and subscribe and find the podcast wherever available and share it with a friend. Man, I'm running out of energy so hard. I don't know if you can hear it in my voice, but this sickness knows I have to be doing this, knows I'm pushing through a work week, and is like, we're going to kick your head in. So here we are, getting our head kicked in. Podcast is available on Apple iTunes, whatever it's called, Spotify, other podcasting services, the major ones. Check it out there. Let us know what you think of the show, of course. Go to waste360.com for more news, more coverage of the Waste World podcast and the waste industry at large. And, hey, thanks for listening. My name's been Gage Edwards. And remember, it's our world. Let's not waste it.